IVM.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories, India's very own travel podcast, where each week we share the journey of travelers in their own words and relive their experiences with you, our listeners.
Hi, people. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Musafir Stories. You might be wondering, what's this unfamiliar voice? Well, my name is Nikhil Shankar. I'm just filling in for Saif and Faiza for this bit. I host a podcast called Get Out, where we share inspirational stories of travel, culture, adventure, society around us, and so on and so forth, which also includes my experiences. I think there'll be a link to my website, getoutpodcast.com, in the show notes as well. You can also find it on your favorite podcast app, hopefully. Anyway, on today's episode of the Musafir Stories, our guest Khaliq chats with Saif and Faiza about his misadventures in the caves of Meghalaya. The Northeast India, you guys. What a beautiful place that is. By the way, if you haven't explored that region, you're definitely missing something awesome. Although I've been to the Northeast recently, it's been exactly 10 years since I've been to Meghalaya. Time to go there again, I guess. It feels like there's some motivation coming our way in this episode. Stay tuned.
So, with that introduction, we'd love to welcome Khaliq Parkar, a very, very special guest, a social scientist who loves traveling. Traveling is a part of his work, his field work rather, and also otherwise. Khaliq, thank you so much for being a part of the Musafir Stories and welcome to the podcast.
Hi Khaliq, welcome to the Musafir Stories.
I'm glad to be here.
It's our pleasure.
Yeah, Khalif, the intro we gave was kind of short and sweet. Why don't you speak a little bit more about yourself and your tryst with travel through work or even otherwise?
Well, I have been a student and a researcher for the past 15 odd years. I'm a political scientist by training, and in order to study various aspects such as governance or public participation or student politics or urbanization, I travel to different parts of the country.
Mm-hmm.
And wherever I go, apart from, doing the field work, I also take some time off to travel by myself. So over the years, I have spent quality time traveling through Bihar, traveling through Haryana, parts of Maharashtra, and other places. In this entire process, the joy is discovering places that you see as a social scientist, but also as a tourist, also as a traveler, also as a part of your country that you probably would have never gotten to see before.
That sounds amazing. So Khalik, with all that different perspectives in mind, where are you going to go ahead and take us and our listeners to today?
Well, I'm going to take you to a little point in the forest somewhere near the Bangladesh border in Meghalaya. Away from the main road, when you step off and enter the jungle, you try to find a little pathway and then a little cemented entrance that goes deep into the heart of the earth.
Wow.
And it's literally going to be under the Himalayas. It's going to be under a range of hills, the Khasi Hills, the Jaintia Hills, and the Garo Hills, where there are these beautiful cave complexes that exist from millions of years ago.
Oh my God. Okay.
Wonderful. I think that was a great way to describe where you're taking us to. Also, we have done a lot of mountains and the beaches and the hills and
Yeah, and
forests.
everybody wants to be on top of the Himalayas, but this is the other way around where you have gone deep underneath.
And I think what is also kind of mind-boggling is that not only are these caves like a few million years old, like you called out, but even in terms of how far and wide the network is spread out, right? I just read that it's it's spread over 400 kilometers, and it's about 1,500 caves that have been identified just in Meghalaya, right, Khalid?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, after I visited, I spoke to Brian Dali, who's the founder member and General Secretary of the Meghalaya Adventures Association. And in the past 15 odd years, they have mapped more than 250 kilometers of caves. In fact, one place I probably want to go is the Krem Lymput, which is India's longest cave at 30,000 meters, 30
Right.
kilometers.
Yeah.
And you have to understand this is mapped cave, which means there are passages and caverns that still have not been mapped. So it could very well be 60 kilometers, could very well be 80 kilometers. But yeah, 30,000 meters is quite something.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
Krem Lymput, you mentioned, right? This one is the
The longest.
creme de la creme,
yeah.
right? The longest one in India. I had to use that pun. But like this one is one of the longest, but even worldwide, I think there are a few of these complexes that run into even, I think, over 100 kilometers, right? So these are pretty vast, and it's just that like because they're underneath the ground surface, like a lot of us don't know, because the mountains get all the limelight and the attention, right? Given that they're visible, but these caves are like an ecosystem in themselves. The way they're formed in, and would you also like to add how these are formed? I mean, you just briefly touched upon it, because it depends on various. The formation also, like it changes from cave to cave, I believe, right? Because Faiza and I recently visited the Belem caves here down south in Andhra Pradesh. They're obviously not as long as the caves in Meghalaya, but those were formed by a river.
Yeah.
A few, a few hundred or few thousand years ago, I believe. So, how were these caves formed?
Yeah, so the Brian Kharprandali, who I was talking to, he's founder member and general secretary of the Meghalaya Adventure Association. They have been exploring these caves, and they have documented in the Khasi Jaintia Hills 1,350 caves so far. And it's interesting. I mean, you wonder how such long networks are formed. And I was reading about it. I went through certain geology books, and I spoke to a geologist at the University of Cambridge as well to understand this a little bit better. So as the plates crunch together and the hills start rising up, every rainfall sends in water deposits that seep from the cracks, creating little channels, creating little furrows. But also water seeps in through the hills as well, through the rising hills. And so this interesting two-way process where on one side these furrows are slowly widening up, and they are widening up millimeter by millimeter as rainfalls increase. And once the caves are sizable in nature and the water that's seeping through those hills drips down, you create stalactites and stalagmites.
I think it's like you mentioned, it's quite a learning for us also. On the podcast, we usually discuss a lot of things about traveling and all of that, but this is like educational in one way as well. And yeah, we don't tend to think a lot about these, even when we are indulging, say, in adventure sort of activity, that we might actually be passing through things or places that have been like formed over millions of years ago, right? So that's really mind-boggling, as far as I mentioned. But Khaliq, why don't you also tell us a little bit about how you ended up in one of these caves and how your experience was?
So my friend Xavier and I wanted to go to Arunachal. We wanted to reach this point called Kibitu, which is the easternmost part of eastern and northernmost motorable road in India, very close to the Chinese border. And in order to reach Kibitu, we had to travel through different points in Arunachal, and we need what are known as inner line permits. I always find this fascinating that as citizens of India, you need a permit to travel within your own country. And one place to get these permits is Meghalaya in Shillong. There is an office where you can apply for these permits. And while I got my permit in a couple of days, Xavier, because he was a French national, required permissions from the Ministry of External Affairs and the Foreign Ministry and things like that. So we were waiting for his documents to arrive from Delhi, and a day went by, another day went by. We went eating local food, listening to local music, meeting up with the rock star laureate Lou Majao. We spent time at the Northeastern Himalayan University, found little archery contests happening near the racecourse. And over 2-3 days, while we thoroughly enjoyed ourselves, we did have a little bit of a feeling of, hey, we need to do more. We were getting bored a little bit. And so we discovered that, hey, Meghalaya has these cave complexes that date back to a few million years and they're unique and etc. etc. So we sat and made a plan and said, let's go and do a little bit of cave exploration.
Okay.
And we had the option of going to Mawlong caves near Cherrapunji, which are around 500 meters, and they have been lit up, and you can buy tickets and enter. And we didn't want to do something touristy. We want to do offbeat things. So we went through different lists and found that other caves exist, and we found Krem Lymput, which was described as an intermediate cave of 3 kilometers. So we looked around and we asked around for cavers, but on our student budget, it was too expensive. So we said, you know what, let's just read lots and lots. We are researchers, so we'll figure it out. And we sort of had a general plan of where it was between two villages of Nongbri Ba and Nongbri Ji. So we thought, let's just go there and find the cave complex.
Oh my God, okay.
And that's how we set off. We set off on the motorcycle early in the morning from Shillong. We kept driving. There was no Google marker for the entrance of the cave, but there were descriptions about where in the jungle it was.
Okay.
We had a few misses. We at one point reached the Bangladesh border where a bunch of BSF guards said, "What caves? We don't know what you're talking about."
Lord.
And you can't just walk into Bangladesh. So just turn around. Till we found, between the two villages, we found a turning and there seemed to be some sort of a path. So we just parked a bike by the side of the road, took a leap of faith and said, okay, let's go through the jungles and find this. And so in the middle of nowhere, this bike was parked. And I'm sure if somebody walked by, they would have said, somebody's here. But I don't think they would have known that we would be entering the caves or anything like that.
And right. And what time of the day was this?
This was around 9:30 in the morning. We had a nice cup of tea on the way, a beautiful road that crawls through the mountains. At points it's above the clouds, at points it's below. So it was the drive itself was stunning as well.
And at this point, nobody else knows that you guys are venturing into a cave.
Yeah, I mean, nobody else knows, largely because we didn't feel the need to tell anybody, and that, in retrospect, was a terrible, terrible idea. As we walked through the jungle and we slowly, a half kilometer in, we somehow found this little outcrop, a cemented path where the entry to the cave was, and a group of boys from the local village, which is around 6 kilometers away, were coming out of that cave.
Okay.
So they were the only people who knew we were going off into this cave. And while we had torches and water, they had a really big, powerful torch, which they said, hey, you guys want to take this along? And we said, yeah, sure, why not? So those three random boys in the middle of nowhere knew we were entering this cave.
Okay, that's kind of them to hand over the torch to you guys.
Kind of them, and it's a little scary that you haven't really informed, say, either, I mean, if you had a local guardian there, or at least like somebody around in the vicinity, that you were going in there, given that this is one of the, this is not a very touristy cave, like you said, right? It's not one of those ticketed and well-lit caves. So that way, I think something like Khaliq said, the thing to do is definitely let people, somebody, at least local guardian or people let them know that you're going there, or even better, if you can find somebody who's been in those caves, who knows his or her way around those caves, that's the best. But yeah, we have here two rebels who wanted to do something offbeat. Tell me what happened next.
Okay, so let me describe how these caves appear. So as I said, these caves are formed by years of water percolation through the limestone, and so these are mostly caused by annual rainfall. And so there are two distinct features. There are these passageways, which may be thin, which may be short, which may have low ceilings, and there are large rooms, there are large caverns that exist. So anytime you enter a cave, you would go through a passage, then you would come into a larger room. In this large room, there would be another passage which would lead off to the next room. But what you have to keep in mind is each room will have multiple passages, and each of those passages will lead to multiple rooms. So it's a network. Think of it as a mesh of passages and caves, something that you would make with clay and matchsticks, like something that just keeps connecting onward as a fractal that keeps going deeper and deeper into the hills.
Absolutely. And Khalik, talk a little more about even the formations that you saw inside, because we've been to one of the caves down south, and even like standing at one particular place, we could see like 10 different formations of different kind in every possible direction. So, what are the different formations that you guys
The
saw?
most obvious formations that we see, what we call as stalactites and stalagmites. Stalactites drip from the ceiling while stalagmites are
From the ground.
on the ground.
Right.
And these are, some of these are tiny, some of these are huge. So, for example, all through different passages and caverns, you would find stalactites about 2 inches, 4 inches, 8 inches. While in the larger caverns, you could find stalactites and stalagmites that were as huge as 15 feet, 20 feet as well. And these are all unique patterns that have been created through decades of sedimentation, centuries and millions of years of sedimentation. Every single drop sort of creating a new pattern on its own. It's a completely unique experience because regardless of where you are and the way that you shine your torch, all of these formations appear differently. Within the passages as well, because of the years of flowing water, you may find undulating stone, you may find little pockmarked stone, and it's beautiful to see how centuries of water has made its way through the rocks.
You're right.
I distinctly remember this one part where there was this long rocky slope which angled around 45 degrees, around 30 odd feet down, where there was just crystal clear blue water. But there was no way of getting back up if you had slid down that passageway. And so we were with wonder and amazement looking at all of this, shining our torches around, being very careful where we were stepping, making sure we were not getting into cramped passageways, things like that.
Right.
Absolutely. It's like a whole new world out there, right?
Absolutely.
Down there rather.
Yeah, as most explorers put it, it's sort of entering a new world which hasn't been mapped before.
Absolutely. And especially given the kind of technological advancement we've already made, most parts of the world are mapped in some way or the other, but here you're literally exploring something new.
Yeah, I mean, we have 5 square meter resolution of satellite images, oceans have been mapped, ocean floors have been mapped, but here is a part of the world where no one or maybe 10 people have gone in before, and that's another sort of experience.
Absolutely. Go on. So how was Krem Lymput, right? This is the cave that you explored. Once you've gotten in, like, what are the kinds of things you're seeing around? You did kind of touch upon the different kinds of formations you're seeing. But what was the main like passageway that you had to go through, and like what was the final milestone or the destination that you were looking to get to?
Well, because we had read about it, one of the features that everybody spoke about was the Mughal room, and we decided that we will reach the Mughal room and then we will turn back. And so we enter the cave around 10 o'clock, and as we are making our way in, we are going through these passages. We are slowly going downward into the earth. Things start becoming darker and darker. I'll briefly talk about how dark it is. At one point of time, it's absolute sensory deprivation. You switch off the torchlight, you switch off your phones, and you just stand there, and there's absolute nothingness. And that's an experience you very rarely have today. Whether you're in cities, whether you're in the rural area, there's just absolutely no way to imagine that sort of absolute darkness. I mean, there's no pinprick of light, there's no dull glow in the distance or anything like that. It was just absolute pitch darkness. And the same goes with sound as well. There's just no sound. If you can hear your own heartbeat, you can hear your blood flow, you can hear every single scratch you make, every single footstep that you take. And when you're standing in that absolute darkness, saying nothing, doing nothing, and you hear one little drop from a stalactite, and that drop reverberates in that entire room. And that is a sensory experience I don't think I have ever had anywhere before. And I think that the cave would be perfect to record a podcast, considering how neat it was. So we start moving in through these caverns. We start going in through these passageways. Every time we come across a room, we take a few pictures. Even in the passageways, we are taking pictures, and we are clearly following what seems to be the obvious path. Wherever we are confused, one of us would go ahead and make sure that the passageway does lead into another room. And so, as we are going in, we seem to be fairly in control. We seem to know what we are doing. And as we are going through these passages, sometimes we are walking sideways, sometimes we are on our knees, sometimes these stalactites just scraping our arms and our foreheads. But with every single passage and every single room, we were really, really enjoying the experience. And finally, where we reach is the Mughal room, which is approximately 2 kilometers in. And we had read the descriptions that, and when we dropped into the Mughal room, we were like, okay, this is the Mughal room. It's huge. It's 50 meters high. There's a giant stalactite in the middle, which is a stalagmite, which is approximately 15-20 feet high, 20 odd feet wide. And you can see these grand formations all around you. And you just pause and wonder how each of that has been formed over millions of years with drops of water, right? And that completely blew us. And we set up like the torches, we took a few long exposure photographs, tried seeing from different angles. Wherever you stand in any of these caves, it appears different. As the shadows sort of fall differently, depends on where you're standing. And so it was a completely, even within that unique cave, everywhere you go is a sort of unique sight. And that was something I don't think I'd ever seen anything like that before.
Right. Just one thing, Khalik. So when you guys were getting to the room, did you all come across even like pools or tiny pools of water and all that?
Yeah, so while we were walking in, there were places. So one is you spot these insects around. You find these endemic species, spiders, and you find arachnids, and you find other insects, which was beautiful. But you also find these little pools of water that have been created. In some places you find, so some of these are pretty small. They may be like a feet or so. Some of the places we had to go in through knee-deep pools. In some of the other caves in Meghalaya, you have to swim through like a large pool in order to reach the next passageway. But here, this was just before the beginning of the monsoon, so the water was not high. But we did spot this crystal clear blue pools in different parts of the cave, and that was something else. Right.
Yeah, and also I think good point to call out is a good thing to call out at this point is that especially during monsoons, right? These caves tend to get flooded, given that they're below the ground level. These caves do tend to get flooded, and given how how much of rainfall, especially this part of the world gets, right? The Northeast and Meghalaya, it's definitely a good idea to avoid doing these adventure activities or cave explorations during the monsoon seasons, right?
Definitely, because these caves do flood when it rains. There are passages and points where you would simply be unable to cross because the water is completely full over there. And so there are certain caves that you can explore, but you require a little bit of snorkeling gear in order to sort of make it through a passage and things like that.
Exactly.
And that's something that even the local explorers between May and November just tend to avoid taking people into the caves because of how deep the waters are.
Exactly, and actually kind of reminds me of this recent episode also, right? I think it was in Thailand that
Yes.
bunch of kids were stuck in a cave for 2 or 3 days before they could be rescued, right? I think it was
Absolutely,
a local soccer team there of kids that went there exploring, and they got stuck there because it started to rain heavily after. So definitely do keep that in mind while exploring these caves. But yeah, getting back to you, Khalid and Xavier. Now you've finished. I mean, you've reached the summit of sorts, right? This is the
Yes.
summit in your books. Now, having kind of done a little bit of exploring around, a little bit of photography, and kind of enjoying the completely different and out of the world kind of environment and ambience inside. When did you decide to start heading back, and what was that experience like?
So this was around 12, 15. And we have taken our photographs. We've had a sip of water, high-fived each other, slapped each other on the back, saying, this is something to remember. And we wanted to get out before the sunset,
Right.
which would be around 4 o'clock, because we are in the east. And of course, we wanted to avoid any early rainfall that may by chance fall.
Right.
So after sort of 15 odd minutes of taking photographs around, we said, okay, this is the time we should head back. It'll take us another 2 hours to get out, and then we could be back in Shillong before the dark of the night. So we by 12:15 we had decided let's head back. This is where we
Things got
realized
rocky.
that, yes, things got rocky. And because until now the fact that we sort of were careful and we had a clear goal in mind, and we made it to that goal, we assumed that we were doing all the right things.
Right.
So we thought all we have to do is follow our footsteps, and we shall get back out. But things are not as easy as they seem. And as we started moving back, and we left the Mughal room, and we went through the passage to the previous room, we looked at each other and we said, this is not the previous room. So we said, okay, let's go back to the Mughal room. And so we turned back and went to the Mughal room, which was not the Mughal room, but another room. And so we said, okay, something seems off, because we seem to be just going from cave to passage to cave. But when we take a passage, we don't go back to the cave. We go to another cave.
Oh, God.
And that's when we realized that we are doing something wrong. And we said, all right, let's try to find the Mughal room, because that is the last clearly identifiable space that we were at. And so we found a couple of passages. We tested them one by one till we found the Mughal room again. And we came back to the Mughal room.
Okay, thank God. At least that's like a
Yeah.
you can take that.
But
as...
this is where we sort of started getting a little bit on the edge. Now, both of us really like to watch films. Both of us like to read, and we have read sort of various experiences of people being lost. These old Reader's Digest drama in real life sort of incidents. And so everywhere, one thing that people always say is don't panic. And Douglas Adams says that in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, is like, don't panic. And so we both looked at each other and said, you know what? Let's just do one thing. Let's not panic. If either of us starts losing it, the other person has to be the lifeboat, right? We have to say, okay, let's do this.
Right.
So at this point, we are calm. We are calculated. We are saying, okay, we need to leave the Mughal room. We need to go back how we came in. And so we start finding out passages that lead out of the Mughal room. And we go through one passage which becomes too narrow, or go through another passage which becomes a dead end, or a third passage which goes into a room which we probably have never seen before. And I say probably because the way you shine the torch, the room appears different.
Right. And even the angle, you guys entered the room from a different side and you're leaving from the other.
And sometimes it would lead up to these sudden drops where the stone sort of just led off into a drop. So we were, it was almost like each passage led up to a different form of obstruction or a different form of end. And that was a little frustrating. And there were these really funny moments, because we would enter a passage and we say, okay, we have never come here before. And then start looking around and then see a footprint on the other side of the room.
Oh,
and we
God.
said, wait a minute, how come we have been here? Because we definitely didn't come in from this passageway.
Oh, my God.
And by this time, an hour has gone by, an hour and a half.
Oh.
And we start feeling a little bit exhausted.
Right.
Our water has run out. In a moment of stupidity, Xavier has left a bottle of water at the entrance of the cave along with a couple of apples.
Oh.
But because our bags were too heavy. But and there was this point of time where we simply filled in the bottle from a pool of water and drank it. We said, "Hey, what's going to happen? Let's just try it." And it was nice, delicious mineral water. So that was fine.
Yeah, I think it's a little scary with respect to if time is passing by, because even if you guys walk up and come across an exit or the mouth of the cave, you would not realize it if it's dark outside, right?
Absolutely. That's something we were really worried about, that if we got closer to 4 o'clock and we came near an exit, we would be unable to spot the light through the jungle. And we really wanted to, and that was something in the back of our minds, that we need to make it out before sunset.
Right.
And so we do this 1 hour of circling around the Mughal room, and then we just sit back down. And we sit down next to each other, not saying anything. 5 minutes go by, 10 minutes go by, just each of us in our individual thoughts. I'm not going to lie, both of us thought of writing notes, thinking of possibilities. We knew that perhaps the boys from the village would come back looking for their torch, something or the other. On one hand, there was this hope. On the other hand, there was this we need to start making hard decisions.
Right.
And this is also the moment when you start scrambling for every single possibility that you have ever imagined. So after those 10 odd minutes, both of us looked at each other and said, okay, look, we are smart, we are young, we are rational people, we are scientists, we shall figure this out.
Right.
And so we thought back to everything we had ever read, everything we had ever seen, everything possible under the sun, and thought of a few things. And at this point of time, while you are extremely clear-headed, you can be extremely stupid. So at one point of time, I pull out my phone, thinking I'll get a satellite signal under a few hundred feet of stone.
Oh, God.
Maybe I'll make the compass work or some nonsense like that. At another point of time, I thought smartly, hey, I have a box of matches, so let me light a match. Because, in all these films and books, you find people who light a match and the flame flickers and then they find the exit.
Right.
There were these places where I lit a match and the flame would be ramrod straight.
Oh, God.
Then I would go to a passageway and light a match and the flame would flicker. But then, at that point of time, you can't remember if it flickers towards the exit or away from the exit.
I know.
So it's okay, now we're back to square one. So there's a little bit of hyperactivity, there's a little bit of willingness to do something, but there's a lot of stupidity which can easily descend into hysteria or panic and things like that, which somehow both of us, Xavier and I think were doing some sort of buddy system of keeping each other in check. But yeah, so as we sort of now realize, we are an hour and a half in, we seem to be fairly lost. We know that we have been stupid, and we are not beating each other about it, but we are saying, okay, we need to think properly. And so we start going through our bags looking for everything we can. And I found, so I love kebabs, right? So in whatever city I go to, and I find delicious kebabs, I'm like, yes, this is it.
Yeah.
So in Guwahati, the previous week, we had gone to a restaurant which had some fantastic Sikh kebabs and had saved their menu. And their menu was bright red in color.
Okay.
So we tore it up into little triangles. And what we did was we said, okay, what we are probably doing is we are re-entering same spaces over and over again. And that's confusing us. So we need to strike things off a list.
Okay.
And so we start this process where one of us stays in the Mughal room with one torch, the other person goes with a torch through a passageway to see where it leads. If it becomes a dead end, if it goes into a strange room, etc., we mark it with a red triangle saying don't come back here.
Okay.
There are certain passages that connect ahead. So 2 different passages would connect ahead. So we would shine light from 2 different sides to make sure that we are not traveling in U-turns and things like that. So this way, one by one, we started marking off all the exits from the cave. We can see every single passageway has been marked by red.
Oh my God.
And some of these would be marked in red after discovering a passage and a room. So it was pretty exhaustive. It was literally sort of trying every possible pill to get the fever down, and nothing seemed to be working.
Yeah,
And
it's like one of those labyrinths, right? You get it.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, absolutely.
but I'm glad that you guys kind of took it sensibly and just didn't set off all the alarm bells right away, and you kind of planned this out, and you kind of try to narrow down those, right? That way, at least
Yeah.
you're heading in one direction and also not going in circles. That was, I think, a great thing, because it's very easy, especially in circumstances like these, to just keep going in circles and not realizing how much time you're losing there.
Yeah. And both of us, I mean, in the first sort of round where we realized that we're doing something wrong, and it's interesting how you mentioned this circularity, because it's also in your head, but it's also like a geographical circularity, because you keep coming back to the same space.
Right.
So both of us were very aware of it, and we knew that we had to sort of be rational, be calculated, and that's what started off this triangulating exercise. And once we sort of had marked off every single passageway, we again had a momentary shutdown. We said, okay, if all of this is closed, we have just really, really majorly screwed up and have done something completely wrong. And so we sit back down, and I can't remember whether it was me or whether it was Xavier, but we sort of looked at each other, and one of us said, if all the passages are closed, we are probably not seeing the right passage. And then it dawned on us that, hey, perhaps the passage is not at eye level. It's at a higher level than us, because this cavern is so large. And so we started shining the light above our heads. And as these shadows, because this cave has these undulating patterns, as we slowly, methodically, through the room, started sort of shining it around 7 feet, 8 feet higher. One point, we saw a little boot print that was sliding down.
Oh my God.
And we said, hey, how come neither of us realized we have been going deeper into the earth, descending every single place? And that was like a moment. That was an epiphany. That was a realization that, okay, this is what we need to do. We need to go higher.
Right.
So we climb up, and again, we are not sure, right? Because there is a random boot print here, which could be from any of the expeditions. So one of us climbs on top, shines a torch and says, this is probably it.
Oh my God.
Hoists the other one up, and we go through that passageway to the next room. Now here, what we do is we do the same triangle exercise. We keep marking it off. And by now we know we need to look for the higher passages. So we start looking for passages that seem to be somewhat leading upwards. But we don't want to walk into a random upward passageway, because who knows where that goes.
Right.
So we very carefully would keep marking all passageways, making sure there are no dead ends, making sure there are no drops into water and things like that, and kept moving. And so this, took another, after that first hour of fright and confusion in the Mughal room, it took us approximately an hour to get out of the Mughal room. But then it got faster. Then between each cavern would take around 15-20 minutes till we found the next passageway and the next cavern. So we were lost for those 3 odd hours, but we by now sort of felt a little bit elated because we seemed to be figuring it out. We were making do with the little pools of water here and there. We were talking to each other nicely, not getting angry with each other, because that was a worry as well, right?
Yeah,
That you could start blaming each other, saying, hey, you made me do this, or you made me come down this way, and things like that.
Definitely.
And so as we are doing this, and then you find this wall, I was describing the patterns of water. Sometimes you would find a wall which had that distinct pattern that I could see on my camera. I said, hey, yes, I have a photo of this. This is distinctly the same place. And so you feel this sense of elation that you're doing something right.
No, good.
And we start sort of making our way slowly out of the cave. And interestingly, the very, very vivid image both of us had was, you will see the light. You will see the light and you will make it to the exit, right? And it's a sort of end of an epic film moment when you see the light streaming in and you want to clamber out of it, sort of image that's going through our head. But interestingly, it wasn't the light. We first heard the crickets in the jungle.
my God.
Right,
Okay.
right.
And that was different, right? Because after this absolute silence, after this absolute darkness, it's not light, but it's sound that greets you.
Right.
And then it is the light that greets you. And as we slowly reached and we found the light, we scrambled out, and we reached out and we got back out, and we just looked at each other, looked around the jungle. There was still sunlight. We looked at each other and we just burst out in hysterical laughter.
No.
Both of us were scarred, like we were bleeding from our arms, from our head. There were scratches all over. Denims were scratched in different places. Shoes were scuffed beyond recognition. And we found that bottle of water that Xavier had left, and we just opened it and guzzled it and found apples and just laughed and laughed and laughed without saying anything, just eating those apples. And it was just like an immense sense of relief, of adrenaline, of realization that dawned upon us.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I can totally relate to this. I mean, obviously, mine was not as bad because me and a friend of mine, Abhishek, we had gone trail running. We
Okay.
wanted to be a little cool, so we didn't want to run on the trails within the city. So we went trail running in one of the woods while I was in New Jersey, and a similar sort of situation happened that we got lost a little bit, and we're running. We don't even know if we're going around in circles, and that cricket kind of in the background moment, right? That was for us. Cars or the highway close by
Yeah,
when we could hear. That was the moment for us, and I still remember when we had started to run that final lap. It almost felt like a victory lap, and the music of those chariots of fire, the theme song in
Right,
the background,
exactly.
slow motion, and all of that. Right?
And it's like, I mean, all of us have been lost before in different places, sometimes in cities, sometimes in the mountains or the hills.
Yeah.
But there is always some point of a reference. There's
Exactly,
always
yeah.
a hill, there's always sunlight, there's always the canopy of trees. And that was something that was completely different for us, right? Because there was absolutely nothing that could be, there was no sky to look up to, there was no light to expect. And that just blew our minds as how lost we really were.
Exactly. I mean, there's no orientation at all, right? So that kind of magnifies the whole thing so much more. Now, Khaliq, just referring or coming back to these caves, right? I know we did mention that this is something that has caught on as a kind of a adventure activity, right? Caving, as people
Yes.
like to call it, in the recent past. And I understand there's a lot of challenges also that these caves and the different formations are facing, right?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things after we got out of the cave, we went back to the Nongbriba village where the boys were from, and we found a tea stall and we asked. I remember the boy's name was Vishnu, and we asked, "Is Vishnu around? We need to give him his torch." And the tea stall was owned by Vishnu's grandparents, and so they were asking, "Oh, were you in the caves?" And the grandfather started telling us stories of these caves. They believe that every year, anyone who dies, their spirits reside in the cave, and then on the new year, the spirits leave the cave to go. So annually, they have a sort of festival at the cave that happens. So on one hand, you have this community and tradition and cultural history that local communities have with the cave. On the other hand, you have a biological record of this cave. On the third, you have this geological, scientific record of monsoons and things like that. And that's what makes these caves so unique.
Yeah.
Now, the Meghalaya Adventure Association sort of realizes this value and also realizes that for an otherwise underdeveloped area, these can be great tourist options. But they want to do it in a sustainable manner. They want to do it in a manner that does not damage, that does not affect these caves. Because in this, limestone, as you know, is used for cement and construction.
Exactly.
So there is a large scale mining that's going on. And so with all the drilling and the dynamites, many of these caves have seen collapses, have seen passages being shut off. And that's a risk that, I mean, we are discovering these caves right now.
Right.
And every day there is a sort of, within these thousands of kilometers, there is some sort of damage to the caves that's taking place because of mining. And that's something the locals are very, very worried about, and as well as the scientists, as well as the environmentalists and things like that.
Right.
And so there is this movement to try and preserve the caves. The government of Meghalaya has been instrumental in creating committees, has been making projects. They are trying to encourage it as a tourist activity. So there are both entrepreneurs as well as the sporting association has recognized it as an activity. They are giving out licenses to locals. It becomes a form of employment for the locals.
Right. Okay.
And again, because, I have friends who go to the Northeast as well, who go to Meghalaya, who go to Arunachal, but somehow caving doesn't seem to be the natural, it's not one of those things that appears in the top 5 things to do.
Yeah.
And so that is still being, that publicity is still happening. I mean, people are unaware we have a 30-kilometer long cave with endemic species. I mean, I find it fascinating that such a beautiful thing exists and people just don't know that it is there. If you ever want to go caving, I strongly recommend getting in touch with the Meghalaya Adventure Association. They have a website with phone numbers. In Shillong, they do properly trained visits. You can describe what sort of experience you want, and so they're willing to take you to caves which require swimming, which require rappelling, and they have trained local people who are very good at what they do.
Okay, perfect. We'll add all the links in the show notes section, and also the link of your articles.
And your wonderful Reddit post that I'm so glad served as a platform for us to connect, right? So
Yes.
we will definitely link those so that our listeners too can go have a read. But again, thank you so much, Khaliq. It was a really, really unique experience on the Musafir Stories too, and thank you for bringing it to the fore.
Thank you, Khaliq.
Same here.
That was yet another great episode of the Musafir Stories. If you guys like the show, please subscribe to us on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, Audioboom, Savan, Pocket Casts, Castbox, Stitcher, or any other podcasting app available on iOS or Android. Please do leave us a review on iTunes. It goes a long way in the show's discoverability. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. We go by the handle The Musafir Stories. Or, if it suits you, you could email us at themusafirstories@gmail.com or visit our website at www.themusafirstories.com for more information. All of these links will be made available in the show notes section of each episode. So here's to more traveling, sharing, and inspiring. Stay tuned for our next episode. Until then, happy travels and goodbye.